Okay, how's everyone doing today? Am I turned on? All right, excellent. So that's an awesome introduction. I hope I can live up to that. Hey, so let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Aamir Lakhani. First of all, just ignore everything you've ever learned about spelling and grammar, and the name makes sense, I promise. I actually always ask my dad, because my sister's name is named Sarah, and I always ask my dad, like, hey, what the heck happened? Like hey, you could have given me a name that was more pronounceable. And my dad's like, I named you after a star player from Pakistan that when they made it to the World Cup for the first time. I was like, World Cup, man, I love soccer, awesome. Like, who is this player? And he's like, not that kind of World Cup, it's cricket. And I'm like, great, what is cricket? And I started looking at it, and I was like, wow, they're just playing baseball all wrong here. So so I'm still learning, but I always say by trade, I'm a hacker. That's what I do. I actually started off my career working for the government and in network intelligence and security intelligence. My job was to actually hack like other places, other governments, like try and find intelligence. Don't worry, I was authorized to do so. I had contracts to do so, so I wasn't doing anything illegal. So I always say I'm a hacker. I'm a hacker by trade, and it's a really cool job because you get to like find out the vulnerabilities that exist in networks and find out what's wrong with these networks. You'll also see I call myself a ninja. I'm actually a ninja in training. I started studying Krav Maga only about 6 weeks ago, so I'm still I'm a really basic training. In fact, I just got beat up by like this 8-year-old girl in Krav Maga. But they told me she had 7 weeks of experience. So so that hopefully I'll get better and better. And believe it or not, I'm actually a prince by blood. At least a relative. I'm actually related to the royal family in Dubai. So I always say I'm a prince by blood. Believe it or not, I'm actually 203rd in line of succession to the royal crown. Yeah. You laugh, but that's the pickup line I used on my wife, and like I'm married now, so it worked on her. But I've been working in security for a long time. I have 15, 20 years of experience. I've written a couple of books. I've been on Fox. I've been on CNN. Now I know that doesn't say much because OJ's been on CNN. But I haven't killed anyone yet, so sometimes it gets really, really tough in security. I think what I'm really proud of, and if you guys don't recognize it, is I was actually named Times Person of the Year in 2006. I appeared in their magazine, on the cover of the magazine. It was a really awesome experience for me. I bought like a whole bunch of copies of magazines everywhere. I tried to show my mom. She just shook her head. Saying, you don't need to buy any more copies. It's fine. I got it. For a while I've been doing security, and what I've learned about cybersecurity, especially cybersecurity, is it's all about perspective these days. It's about the view you bring into the world, because we all see things a little differently. And I couldn't be more reminded about that when someone asked me what a hacker does.
I mean, what is hacking?
Seriously.
Well, I know in the movies, there's usually a montage where they play really serious music, even though you're just watching somebody type really, really fast. And then it says, like, server acquired, and then boom, something's hacked. Did it for the lulz, all that good stuff. I just don't know what happens during the typing part, or even what the word hacking means exactly.
Now, people always ask me, what is hacking, right? Like when, my mom actually asked me, she's like, I don't get really what you do. And she's like, you're Indian, so you're a programmer, right? And I was like, no, I'm actually not a programmer. I don't really do anything with programming. And she's like, well, you're not a doctor, so you must be a programmer because, you're Indian, right? And I'm like, no. I go, you know what? It's my job to actually look at different perspectives, kind of look at things with a different lens and see how things work. Now, I couldn't be more reminded about this when, since we're in education, a teacher one time asked a student to draw what they want to be when they grow up. And the little girl actually drew this picture because she wanted to be like mom. She's like, please draw what you want to be when you grow up. Now, I want you to think to yourselves, what is this a picture of? Right? I'm sure in back they're thinking like, why did I bring this guy in? What is he showing right now? Well, mom had to actually write a letter and explain this picture. Dear Miss Jones, I wish to clarify, I am not now, nor have I ever been an exotic dancer. I work at Home Depot, and I told my daughter how hectic last week was before the blizzard hit. I told her we sold out of every single snow shovel we had. And then I found one more in the back, and that several people were fighting over who would get it. Her picture doesn't show me dancing around the pole. It's supposed to depict me selling the last snow shovel. From now on, I will check her work. Now, as you all guys, as you can probably tell, and as most of you already guessed, this was a snow shovel that was being sold. You know, and that kind of reminds me of like how we always think of security in one way, and we really kind of forget where some of the threats really exist in today's environment. And I see that all the time. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here. This picture on the right, that looks like a power surge protector, a multiple, just plug-in things. I actually found this at a government facility, a top secret facility, and it was plugged in behind a printer. A printer was plugged into it, and it was giving power to a printer. It looked normal. Oops. That wasn't normal. All right. So, like I said, that power, it looked like a normal power surge protector. Now, what it was actually on the end, it actually had a whole computer sitting inside it. It was a hacking computer. It had all these hacker tools built into it, and it actually had a cell phone, a 3G, 4G card into it as well. Now, the advantage of that is, like, if you have a 3G, 4G card, a hacker can get right into the network. He can bypass firewalls, any type of security devices someone has, and he can actually use that device. That device had built-in wireless as well, so he could scan the network for built-in wireless. And it actually had a network port on it as well that was acting as a switch, at least people thought it was. Like they thought it was protecting, providing some sort of surge protection on the network cable. But it was doing a man-in-the-middle attack as well. So he was attacking the wired network, as well as scanning the wireless network, and getting in, all being undetected using the 4G modem. This other device right here, this is called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. It's a $99 device. And all it does is it actually scans the network, scans the error to see what wireless networks are being requested. Anytime you have a phone, a computer, it's always looking for the last wireless networks that it connected to. So my computer and my phone is always looking for H honors, since I always travel and I stay at Hilton. The SSID is always called H honors. And my phone's always saying, hey, is H honors out there? Every device does this. What this device says is, whatever device you're looking for, I am that wireless network. So if my wireless network is called my super duper secret home network, guess what? It's actually broadcasting in there. Your phone's like saying, hey, is super duper home network over here? And this says, yes, I am over here. And whatever passwords you give me, whatever authentication you want, I will accept that as well. So not a problem as well. So this is capturing all the networks. Once it does that and you're on your network, once your device is connected to this, it owns you. It can like redirect you to anything. It can like download malware to you. You can do anything you want. And how many times have we left our phones in our pocket, or our computers have been asleep, and they're just connecting to networks, and we don't really check where it's connecting to. And then we're doing like some sort of auto download of our email. We're sending our credentials all over the place, right? They're all being captured by this device. This other device, this is a $20 kit that I found on the internet. A cheap Android phone and a skimmer that you can actually plug into gas stations or any credit card machine. And it will capture the credit card information as well as PINs. It will also bypass the smart chips as well in our credit cards as well. Has the capability of bypassing that as well. Really, really easy stuff. And this is all available like today. Now I want to show you an example of how easy hacking is. I'm actually going to download Adobe Acrobat Reader. And I'm going to do the most simplest thing that a hacker can really do is I'm going to actually create a malware inside this program, this legitimate program. I'm basically going to tell this legitimate program, hey, I'm going to create malware, so if someone runs this program, I'm going to be able to attack their network and bypass all their security programs. I'm actually telling this thing that says call addictive, I'm actually saying it basically mangle this malware so it's not detected by antivirus software. That's all I did, very simple, and I actually renamed it My Evil Program as well, so that's no confusion. Now I'm using a website called VirusTotal, And what VirusTotal does is it actually has like 60 to 70 antivirus security software manufacturers on there to scan malware. I can upload malware documents and see who catches it. Now, this is the most basic thing I can do. So I'm expecting everyone to catch this, right? Because like everyone these days, they have next generation whatever, like security, right? The most greatest, best security. So I'm expecting everyone to catch this, and everyone in red is catching this, which is great. I'm expecting everyone to catch this, right? And what was funny is when I do this, and I'm not trying to call out any vendor, because every time I do this, I'm going to get different results, right? And you'll see there's like quite a few vendors on here that we would expect to be catching the solution, and they're not. I apologize here. I got a little bit of a cough, so instead of coughing in your face, I'll drink some water here. So like I said, most of the vendors are catching that, but some of the vendors aren't. Now, every time I do this, something else happens. Something different happens, all right? And I'm wondering, like, if all the security solutions are so great, right? If everyone's doing this next generation type security all the time, why isn't everyone catching this all the time, especially all the big names that we're used to seeing catch these? So I started looking for threats, and I was like, where can I find like some real threats out there on the internet? And everyone says, like, let's go to the dark net. Let's catch all the threats on the dark net. I'm like, great. What the heck is the dark net, and how do I get on the dark net, right? Do I have to turn off my lights and like start browsing the internet? No, well, the darknet is basically websites that use specialized software. I'm not going to get into most of that, but to get on the darknet, you usually download something called a Tor browser bundle. Now, there's other types of darknet as well, but I'm pretty much talking about Tor. But you can download the Tor browser bundle, or you can download an operating system called Tails. Now, Tails was popular because that's what Edward Snowden was using in advertising when he was like stealing secrets, but there's other types of darknet as well. Now, once you're on the darknet and you want to find all these hacker sites, they're all hidden, right? They're not advertising. You can't really go to Google and find the sites. But there is a collection called the Tor Hidden Wiki, where you can like really find these sites. And it's not really that hidden, because if you Google Tor Hidden Wiki, it's the first link that shows up. So they weren't really trying to be too creative on hiding that. But it has a lot of sites on it. And to be honest, most of the sites that you find at first are probably going to be kind of the fake sites, the scam sites. But once you start looking at these sites and looking at the forums, you'll find where the real hackers start hanging out. And some of the things that I found on the Tor Hidden Wiki or on the darknet was ghost markets. Now, ghost markets are probably one of the most popular things on the darknet. The reason it's called a ghost market is because it's a black market that's very ephemeral in nature. That means it can really appear one day and completely disappear the next day. A lot of them have been taken down. The most famous one was Silk Rose that we heard about. It made a lot of news. It got taken down. There was Alpha Bay, other sites as well. And you can pretty much find anything you can think of on these markets, from cyber exploits to drugs. In fact, a lot of the illegal and even prescription drugs sold offline are being sold on these markets, as well as just hiring people, expertise, hackers as well. And to give you an example, here's a market called the Agora market. This market's actually been taken down, but you can see it has some really interesting stuff. I don't even know what half this stuff means. Afghan Kush. Anyone knows what that means? Like, just raise your hand. We can talk afterwards. When I started looking at this, I started wondering, like, how do people actually order this, right? Because they always like advertise like free shipping or whatever, right? And I was like, what are they doing to actually order this? And what it turns out is they're actually like ordering this at their neighbor's house, or a house that's like abandoned or something. And because our wonderful UPS system and FedEx, they'll drop everything off at your doorstep. No matter how many times you tell them you want a signature, right? They still drop it off at your doorstep, right? And you just wait, and then you pick it up. That's how it normally works. Now, besides that, you can buy anything else, right? Anything else you can think of. Now, I will tell you, some of the stuff may not be as legitimate as it seems, like that Louis Vuitton purse. Do not try and get away with that as a legitimate purse if you're going to give that as a gift. Because they will find out that's not real, right? And they will still demand you to take them to the mall, right? Well, at least my wife did. She's like, no, I don't buy that. I go, what do you mean? It looks legit. These Rolexes, I actually took this picture myself. One of them is a fake. Can anyone tell which one's a fake? Which one was like basically $50 and which one's like, almost 10 grand? The one on the left is a fake. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But like I said, it's always like Christmas on these sites because you can find pretty much anything you can think of. Some really cool things, such as healthcare records. Now, I started noticing, actually, on the internet, like a lot of like health companies were last year, claiming that they had all these health records that were stolen, or they had breached. We always had like, hey, this large company was breached, and they had lots of healthcare records stolen. So I started thinking, like, I wonder if anyone's doing anything with these healthcare records. And it turns out they're extremely valuable because, unlike credit cards and some other identity fraud services, healthcare records, you have all the information on anything you can think of. I mean, you have someone's name, their social security number, their address. So you can open up loans and your own credit cards. You don't have to worry about stealing a credit card anymore because you have everyone's information once you have their healthcare records. And even more than that is healthcare fraud is actually, is a gold mine for attackers because it's very difficult to catch healthcare fraud, and it takes a long time for them to stop that. And you can see that, there were so many healthcare records that were stolen last year. And actually, I found them all from the same guy, who's actually kind of famous now because of how many healthcare records he stole. It's called the Dark Overlord. And he started getting a lot of reputation as a legitimate hacker. And so his price, you can see, went higher and higher. Bitcoins today are, this is the currency of choice, Bitcoins. Bitcoins today are about $7,000 per Bitcoin. He was asking for 170. Don't worry, he'll negotiate down to 2 or 3 Bitcoins if you're really serious. So he just starts off that high. So I started talking to him and said, hey, I'm a researcher, and I feel like this is complete BS. And he's like, you know what, let me prove it to you. He's like, come on, TeamViewer. He's like, here's my TeamViewer address, and I'll do a remote desktop session with you. I was like, wow, first of all, I know you're going to hack me because I know there's like 0 days in TeamViewer, and you're probably going to like try and get to my PC. So I took a PC that was completely isolated, didn't have anything on there, and he actually pulled up my own healthcare records. He got something from my insurance, and he was able to pull up like the prescriptions that I was taking. He was able to pull up my last, basically what my insurance said was my last treatment, and it was my record. And I probably should hide that a little more. Now that I see some stuff, hopefully you missed that. But you can see at least what pharmacy I go to. Hey, Kroger gives you double points on prescriptions. Everyone knows that. All right? I didn't ask. At this point, I was like kind of freaked out. And he told me, he's like, you know what, I know you're going to blog about this. I know you're going to like write about this because, that's kind of like what your job is. But he's like, when you do that, that makes me legitimate. And now when I'm asking for, I basically became his PR, right? I'm like, wow, that's great. And there was a lot of stuff out there. I mean, he could actually like nail this down to like neighborhoods, like specific neighborhoods. Like he could say like, hey, I want to get someone in this block in Brooklyn. And he had so many records, millions and millions and millions of records in the U.S. Now, on top of that, you can just buy credit cards, and at least these guys are nice enough where they will guarantee you a certain amount being charged, right? They'll say, hey, we guarantee you can charge at least $2,000 on this credit card before it gets shut down. Now, surprisingly, what I found more important than credit cards was PayPal. Now, if you look at this, right, this guy's selling for $85 a PayPal account that has a balance of $701. I was like, that's a good return on investment, right? I mean, like, why not? But they're not buying it for that. They're actually buying it because when attackers want to send things out like ransomware and other attacks, they have the same needs that we do. They need high-speed computing and good internet service. And where do they get that? They get that from Amazon, AWS, and other places. And those places, for payments, they take credit cards, which usually get shut down pretty fast. The credit card company is pretty good at detecting fraud, or they take PayPal, which takes a little longer for it to get shut down, a fraud account. They could probably run a ransomware account, using PayPal, at least for 3-4 days, maybe even longer. And by that time, they've doubled, tripled, even quadrupled their money on ransomware, running it on a high-speed hosting service. Now, if you don't want to do that, right, you can buy your own money, you can buy your own IDs. Now, I'm from Texas. If anyone wants a Texas ID, you can buy it on the internet, right? I actually ordered like a passport up here, and I was asked to do so. And I noticed the passports even had like the U.S. Customs RFID chips. Now, I didn't actually test that. I didn't know what it did. I didn't want a one-way trip to Guantanamo Bay or anything, right? But it had that on there, right? And I didn't have the equipment to actually test what was on there or not. But I thought that was really interesting. I thought it's great that the fake ID company has their own copyright notice. was kind of wondering what that was about. I mean, I guess they don't want anyone stealing their stuff, right? And if you don't have the money to do that, you can buy your own money. Now, we know this is fake money. In fact, but a lot of this money actually passed like the black marker test, where you can put like a black marker to make sure it doesn't turn brown to see if it's fake money. It actually passed that test. On some of this, I was actually able to hold it up to a light, and I saw a little string. Now, it wasn't exactly what you would see, but I think like a cashier, like at a fast food restaurant, they're trained to like hold up a $100 bill to the light, look for a little string to make sure it's not fake. It actually passed that. Some of them I was actually able to take to banks, and they actually said like they would have accepted this as real money. They really couldn't tell until I told them it was fake, and hey, can you do a little more testing on this? And at that point, they're like, yes, sir, it is fake. Can you stand here for like 10 minutes, and we'll be right back? I was like, no, here's my get out of jail free card. You guys hired me to do this. They're like, just stay here. Stay quiet. Besides that, you can buy a lot of other stuff, right? You can actually buy hackers. If you don't want to buy your own exploit kits, you can actually hire a hacker. Now, I apologize for the language here, because this guy's a real guy on the internet. And he's basically saying he'll do absolutely anything for the right amount, right? With 500 euros, right, he'll basically ruin someone's life for you if you want, right? Pretty scary stuff. Now, when I started investigating a lot of these organizations, like these cybercrime organizations, they're actually built like Fortune 500 companies. So they have like sales guys that have quotas actually to sell you like enough malware, some of them, right? It's a big business. It's usually run out of places like Russia and other foreign countries in Eastern Europe, usually have organized crime behind it. And then some of the largest organized crime units are running the largest spam networks in the world because there's a lot of money in it, right? It's very interesting. Now, besides that, there's things that we don't want to ever talk about, right? That's on the dark net as well, right? I mean, the Hitman network. Now, this one is probably not real, so, if don't get mad at your significant other and try and call them here, it's probably not a good thing. But at least this guy has morals, right? No one under 16 or top 10 politicians. So, gotta hand it to those guys. I always ask, how much is a life worth? Well, apparently on the internet, it's worth about 10 grand. Right? Now, all this stuff isn't real, right? There's a lot of scams that are out there, right? I mean, there's scams, there's honeypots, there's government sting operations. So I normally tell people the stuff that you find in the first 5 minutes, that's probably not real, right? Don't send your 10 grand to the first Hitman network that you find out there. Honestly, if this stuff was that easy to find, we would probably solve some of our biggest problems that we have in the world right now. Now, I'm not saying anything, but I'm just saying if anyone wants to start like a crowdfunding exercise afterwards, we can try that. I have a Bitcoin wallet set up. No, I'm just kidding. All right, I love Justin Bieber. Second for Make-A-Wish Foundation, so good guy. Right? But there is scary stuff out there. So how do you tell if this stuff is real? Well, it's all about feedback. These places rely on like an eBay system for feedback. But it's not just the feedback that they're looking for anyone. They're looking for some known individual. A lot of times I'll gather a lot of this type of intelligence because they know I'm a known researcher. So they're like, you're known out there. So we're going to have you review our stuff, and there's feedback for you. Now, this is a little different. This is from the Agora network as well. So if you're selling drugs, fast shipping is going to be very, very important for a successful business. When people buy drugs, they want their drugs really fast. Just remember that, okay? And I can probably understand why. So how do we actually solve some of this stuff? Like, what do network companies do when they're looking at all these threats and we need to actually solve this? And there's different ways that people solve this all the time, and this has been the traditional way that we've used. In fact, most network security companies have used for a while, which is some sort of static signature. Let's find the threat, let's categorize the threat, and let's stop that threat. Now, a lot of times what they'll do is threats can be malware, it can be exploits, it can be actual, programs, it can be very complicated, but they'll basically hash that threat. They'll put a signature, they'll fingerprint that threat, and they'll look for that fingerprint. Now, this is actually a very inefficient way of doing that because any changes you make to a threat, any changes you make to a process, the whole hash changes. And that means these static signatures are no longer valid anymore. Now, you always hear about people saying signatures are dead. They're it doesn't work anymore. And that's what they're talking about. But surprisingly, everyone still uses signatures because they're very, very cheap to do. Now, granted, some people may say, we don't do signatures, but we do a cloud lookup. We do something else, right? But that's fine, right? Signatures are very, very fast to do. You can look up millions and millions of them within seconds. And they're very easy to do and very very cheap to do from a CPU standpoint. Now, what's happened is everyone's kind of realized that, and they said, okay, well, let's start putting in some sort of code emulation. Let's look at like cyber threats and like have our researchers kind of like download some of these threats and these sites and these URLs and see who's registering it, and let's like put Windows APIs to see if they affect the PC in some way. If they zip or pack this malware, we'll unpack it. Let's do some sort of code emulation, and that's a good way of doing it as well. But people just will come up with new ways of packing it or making it not readable by a CPU. So then everyone came up with these behavioral signatures, which are essentially static signatures, only they have like trees, decision trees attached to them. They're like, hey, if you see problem A, B, and C, that's a threat. If you see problem 1, look for 2 and 3, that's a threat. And if they're all together, this is a threat as well. It's just essentially a decision tree. That's how almost every security vendor started putting in their signatures and their threats. And that still didn't work, right? We still have problems, right? And everyone has some sort of cyber problems, right? We haven't solved the problem. So then there was this idea of sandboxing. They're like, let's pretend like we have a valid machine here, and let's explode malware into this valid machine. And they're like, we should be able to tell no matter how much the signature tries to hide, no matter what it does, it's going to explode. And when it explodes and has some sort of bad behavior, we'll record this behavior, and then we'll know it's bad. And attackers realized right away, they're like, hey, you know what? How long can they run this virtual machine, this sandbox? This takes a lot of CPU resources. If they're getting 100 files a day, are they going to run 100 virtual machines a day? And even if they do, what about if I just wait like 10 days before I explode that malware? What happens then? It's very expensive to run sandbox solutions. And then, of course, they started looking at things like, hey, if I detect I'm in a virtual machine, don't even run the malware, right? Let's wait until we see a lot of mouse movement or a lot of like internet downloads or something. Let's make sure we're with a real user. So all these things were like kind of evolutions of like detecting threats that we see every day. So today, we have machine learning, AI, right? The big buzzword, right? The thing that's going to solve all your problems. You can all go home happy because AI is going to solve everything. Now, the problem is AI doesn't solve everything. It's just the buzzword of the day. Now, I always say this because I remember a couple of years ago, everyone was talking about, defense. Like, defense is the new way of doing cybersecurity. And then everyone said, well, forget about that. It's all about detection now. Detection is the new way of doing cybersecurity. And then they said, forget about that. It's all about threat intelligence. That's the new buzzword. We're all going to make money out of threat intelligence. And it's kind of our fault because we've told marketing on these companies that this is what we're looking for. So every company is like essentially marketing towards these buzzwords, some sort of super duper holistic echo big data AI system, right? In fact, when I take a look at a lot of these conferences and I go to like places like RSA where you have every security company in the world, everyone says they do AI, right? Everyone's saying like, hey, like we're doing machine learning, we're doing AI, and we can stop all threats. Now, let's figure out what AI really is. I want to actually play a little game with you guys. And I want you to think like a machine. All right? I'm going to give you a problem, and I want you to solve this problem. Now, I want you to come up with an animal. Any animal. All in your head. Everyone got an animal? Is everyone thinking puppy? Now, let's say I give you some characteristics around that. I give you some, protocols around that. And I say that animal has to be a mammal. Everyone still thinking puppy? All right. And I say that animal has to have 4 legs. All right. And then I tell you it has to have gray fur. Possibly could still be a puppy. And I say it has to be around 10 pounds. Now you're already starting to narrow down what that animal is. You're like, I got a problem here. I have a set of solutions that will apply to this problem, right? And I think I have a solution for this. And then I tell you it has to have a short tail. What is that animal? Now I tell you it has to have long ears, right? Now what is that animal? Exactly, it's a rabbit. Now you already had a list of animals. You knew what a possible solution was, and the more information I gave you, you were able to kind of narrow that down. Now the idea is you had to have some knowledge initially to start off with, and then you had to have my parameters. What you just did was machine learning, right? Now, it's a lot easier for us than other places because all machines are not equal.
Who are you?
I'm the Terminator. Who are you?
I'm the Terminator. I'm the T-800. I'm a cybernetic organism. Human tissue of a metal endoskeleton.
I'll be back.
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 Now, we all think differently. We all, process information differently. Well, all machine learning is not always the same. In fact, all machines are not equal either, right? I mean, depending on the programmers, the companies that are behind them, and the experience that they have, they may be different as well, and the results you'll get are different as well. Now, let's talk about malware and cybersecurity and kind of how machine learning works. Let's say I have a set of 100 files. And say if I already know 20 of those files are bad. And I know 80 of those files are clean files, that they don't have any malicious threats. I'm going to start looking at characteristics within those files. I'm going to figure out why are they bad files. Now, this is actually called supervised learning, supervised machine learning, because I have a set of files that I know are good and a set are bad, and I'm trying to basically feed a system and make the system predict when I don't know about the files. But say in this case, I figure out that all the malicious files start up automatically. They all have some sort of registry entry where they'll start up automatically, and they'll go ahead and run their program. And then I look at, 5 of those clean files have the same registry entries. And I go, okay, wow, so I have 20 files that I know are bad that have this registry entry, plus I have 5 clean files that have the same registry entry. I'm going to start doing a little bit of math, right? What is the percentage of likelihood with this registry entry am I going to have malicious files? And come up with 80% because 80% of the files that have this registry entry are bad. That's called a characteristic of malicious files that I'm categorizing. Now, just like you, when you were thinking about animals, I had to actually have some pre-knowledge. I had to figure out what makes a malicious file. And I came up with one characteristic. Now, there's going to be other characteristics that I come up with malicious files as well. And there's actually billions and billions of characteristics. If you start looking at all the malware that's out there, there's billions of characteristics that make up a bad file. And here are just some of them. They could have start registry keys, long sleep timers, run commands, delete files. And then I'm going to have to use my own knowledge to figure out, hey, what is the likelihood of those files being bad? I'm going to have to start weighing. If I see a malicious file, a malware program running, and it starts deleting files, I'm going to have to think to myself, is that bad, and is that always bad, and what is that likelihood? That's coming up with characteristics. I have to start making a decision tree based on that, right? I have to say, okay, if I have startup registry keys, and I run commands, and I delete files, what is the likelihood of that whole process being malicious? Now, what happens is in machine learning, this is the process that we go through. This is what AI goes through, and this is one type of AI. In AI, what you have is you have layers. You have your input files, which is essentially your files that you know about. That could be clean files, known or unknown files, clean or malicious files. And then you have your hidden layers. And your hidden layers are what we call characteristics. It's actually called a neural network as well. So a neural network is essentially programs that are testing for these characteristics. Now in hidden layer 1, I could have all my malicious characteristics. And in hidden layer 2, I could have all my clean characteristics. Now I actually took about a petabyte of files that I got from different sources. And I was able to find almost 3 billion malicious characteristics in that petabyte of files on malware, on known malware. And then I was able to find about 5 billion clean characteristics on file on another petabyte of files that were clean, that didn't have any viruses on them. Now, there's actually more clean files in the world than there are malicious files, so that's why I had more characteristics. I was like, great, this is awesome. I got a lot of characteristics, and if I put this in through this system, I should be able to tell unknown files if they're clean or bad. And it doesn't always work that way because some characteristics may be in a malicious file that may only be used one time, so it's not really that great just to have a lot of characteristics. So what I had to start doing was I had to start analyzing the files. I actually had to have knowledge of analyzing files. So I had to take a set of files that I knew were clean, and I had to take a set of files that I knew were malicious files that already had malware in it. And I started to have to dissect these files. I had to have like help. With zero help, with zero knowledge, right? Machine learning is not magical. It's not gonna like all of a sudden detect, hey, there's a threat out there. You actually have to have that knowledge and dissect that knowledge and figure out if a file is clean or bad on existing files. That's why it's called learning. There's a learning process on that. And then you can take unknown files. Essentially, what I did was, like I said, I ended up taking a lot of files, the raw samples, and I ended up basically running through samples and detecting if they had malicious characteristics or bad characteristics. And I came up with features. I knew these features were bad or good on all files. Then what I started having to do was I had to start weighing those files. I basically had to say like, okay, if I have a characteristics that's just a startup timer and it just starts slowly, how bad is that? I had to give it a weight. And if I had a characteristic, a feature that deleted files, right, or encrypted files, such as ransomware, I had to say like, well, I know this is really bad, and I know this is worse than a characteristic of just starting slower, or a file like just being delayed. And I had to come up with that solution on my own. And there's algorithms that you have to come up with to like actually make those decisions. And this is an algorithm that I found. It's actually a public algorithm on features and weights. Now, all I did from that point is like, I took a file and I rated a malicious feature and a clean feature. So if I had a malicious feature, right, and I labeled it, with a weight of, 100 or 90, and then I had a clean feature and I weighted with a weight of -20, I had a result of 70. Now, at the end of the day, what does that 70 mean? Absolutely nothing, right? That 70 doesn't mean anything unless I say that 70 means something. If that 70 actually means, like, if it's clean or bad, then I have to come up with that, that characteristic. Now, that's something that just takes experience to do. That's something that actually you have to know about. There's no magic that happens, right? And then when I talk to a lot of companies, a lot of like vendors out there, they're like, okay, we use something like this similarly, and we come up with a weight of like 90. If we see anything that's 90, we call it malicious, right? So because we want to be sure if it's malicious or not, right? We want to actually be sure that we don't have any false positives. And this is the whole idea of machine learning, right? Is like actually coming up with these features and these weights. But you just don't do it with one result. You have to do it with multiple layers and multiple features, right? And you have to kind of process this all at the same time. And you can see it gets very ugly very fast, right? Especially if you're not keeping track of all this, right? And you're like, okay, well, I got like a feature, right? I got malicious features. I got clean features. I'm going to have some sort of output if it's clean or bad. Now, the problem we run into is what happens when you have a new file, a new malware that comes out? Because we have that all the time. We have new malware that comes out that no one's seen before. And we're like, great, this malware uses a new process that I haven't seen before, right? And it's bad. Let me go ahead and enter this as a malicious feature. What happens at that point is I kind of screw up my math. I skew my math, right? Because now I'm weighting a feature that's has more weight than the other features that I have. This is all about math and balancing things out. Now, actually, how I ended up testing this was once I got my system up and running, I actually went to a place like VirusTotal. Now, with VirusTotal, if you have a developer account out there, you can actually download all the malicious files that's detected as malicious as well. So I can say out of those 60, 70 vendors, if they detected a malicious file, send me all those malicious files. Now, that's where I got a lot of my malicious features from. Now, what I also did was send me all the files that are clean files as well. So any vendor that didn't detect any malicious files anywhere else, I said, let me go ahead and get these files and test them. And every day I was getting about 10,000 files every day, clean files. And every day I was finding about 200 new files that were 0 days or new attacks every day. That means no one was catching at that point. I was like, this is awesome. I'm like doing something really cool, right? I was like discovering 0 days. But actually I wasn't, right? There was just like new methods of like doing the same attack. A lot of times they were changing something or they were encrypting something so the engine wasn't catching that. So I was able to catch it on this layer, but I still wasn't able to like discover a new 0 day. So at that point I started thinking like, well, if machine learning is so great, right? We should be catching machine learning all the time, right? And then I started looking at all the attacks that are coming out today, like VPN filter, cryptojacking, right? Petya, Bad Rabbit, all the new stuff that's coming out today. I'm thinking like, if machine learning is so great and the AI is great, how come every day we hear about a new attack and it still passes through all the systems, right? I mean, no one still catches these attacks. And every day when you hear about some of these new attacks, everyone's running. They're like, hey, we got a new attack. It's all over the news. Everyone's waiting for a signature update. And I started realizing, right, well, it's still not that great, right? I mean, all this stuff relies on signatures. We still haven't solved a problem. AI is not a solution right now that will solve a problem, right? It just helps us. It just helps us like come up with more ways to attack the same problem. And that's why when you hear about all these problems, right, we haven't solved the problem yet.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
That's pretty much me looking at all of an hour. I cry all the time, so just kind of added that at the end. Now I'll just add in like Terminator 2 is my favorite movie. I thought it made sense here. Has anyone seen Terminator 2? Right? You guys have all seen it, right? They all die at the end, right? Eventually, everyone dies at the end in the timeline. So that's I think where we're at today is that AI is great. It's a great tool, but I think a lot of people, and the reason I did this presentation is I go to a lot of places and I go, hey, what are you doing for the latest malware? They're like, we're running AI. I was like, great. What does that mean? And they're like, we're running AI. I was like, great. What does that mean? I go. You doing supervised learning? You're doing unsupervised learning? What are you doing with functions? Where are you getting your sample sets? And they're like, we're doing AI. We're signatureless, right? And I was like, okay, I don't want to talk to you anymore. That's fine. It's not a magical solution, right? You still need that expertise, you need that experience, and you need to understand what's going on behind the scenes with AI. And I know I got a little technical there, and hopefully that's okay. Hopefully some of you were following along with me and able to understand my broken English, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. But what I wanted you to understand today was that it's still a process. We're still a long way from AI, like solving the world, and probably not that far away from Skynet, like destroying all of us, but still, once we solve that malware attack, I think we'll be a little closer. And I think that's why, training sets are really important. With AI, you're not going to get away from traditional security. You can't forget about the basics, all the hygiene that you already have to do today. Having good security policies, having a good perimeter defense, having good user training, right? Users are still the weakest operating system that we have. And then after that, right, I'll tell you honestly, on all the hacker boards, all the darknet, no one's worried about AI. No one's saying like, hey, I'm trying to like make money off the spam network. I'm worried about AI. No one gives a damn about that, right? I mean, it doesn't matter to them. I mean, like as I showed you earlier, right? You can do the most basic attack still and still get away, using the best security systems. So that $100,000, $500,000 PO that you guys have, it still takes like a couple seconds to defeat that. And the user is still the weakest link, right? No matter what, right? The user is always the weakest link. I remember testing bank systems, and I remember they were telling me all the new security systems that they have. They have physical security. They have guys with guns. They have NAC everywhere. They have firewalls everywhere. And I walked into this bank, and I actually told them, I just walked behind the counter, and the lady's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "You can't touch the money." I was like, "It's okay. I just need to get to the computer. Can you just put this USB drive in there?" She's like, "Yeah, not a problem." I go, "Thanks." Didn't even ask me if I worked there or not, right? And at that point, that was a great report to give to my customer, telling them, oops, I have access to your entire systems. The user is still the weakest operating system today. So, like I said, just wanted to show you a little bit about AI and where we have. I think we got a couple minutes for some questions, or I can stand here really awkwardly for 5 minutes. Any questions?
I'm Steve Wallace from IU, and Amazon has something that they haven't talked much about called Guard Duty. Are you familiar with Guard Duty?
I'm not, but I'm familiar with some of the Amazon products as well.
Okay.
On the AI.
Well, so Guard Duty is a combination of signatures, AI and other things. And maybe we'll talk about it offline then.
Okay.
If you haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be glad. Like I said, like a lot of places doing AI, they're still basing things off signatures. Now, everyone, granted, is trying to get away with signatures. We just saw the problems with signatures. They don't catch anything, but they're still very, very cheap to do. So if you even get a lucky hit with a signature, it's really easy to catch something, right? If you do, it's lucky. You haven't spent any time, any processing power, and you can run millions, hundreds of millions of them within seconds. All right. Any other questions or anything? Go ahead. Luckily, I get paid to hack places and show them like what the problem is. We don't have a good solution. There's not a bulletproof solution, as you know, right? I mean, what I always suggest to people is, do your security hygiene, segment as much as you can, keep track of your resources, be prepared to, track and detect what happens when there is an attack. You really want to make yourself a less visible target, a less attractive target than maybe someone else, like your competitor, right? So most attackers are going to go for the easy target. Like why, people saying like it's easy, attackers like these days, they'll pick the fruit from the lowest tree, right, the lowest hanging fruit. And they don't have to do that. They're just picking it up the ground. Honestly, we're probably hurting their backs, the attackers' backs, because they're bending over so much. They don't really have to do that much work. So just don't be that fruit that's falling on the ground, right? And I think that's what you can do. And you do that by good hygiene, security awareness, user training. All the boring stuff in security that we don't like to do, that's probably the most effective stuff, right? All right. Any other questions or anything? All right. Well, I'll be around afterwards. Like I said, really appreciate you guys inviting me out here, and hopefully you guys enjoyed a little bit of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Aamir.